many of the things that we do in business aren't actually helping us move forward. They're moving us away from our goals. Somehow, despite being incredibly busy, we still feel stuck. Why does this happen? Most of us know what we want. We want to grow our businesses. We want better results. We want financial freedom, more customers, more time with our kids, less stress, and more confidence in our decisions. Yet, we often find ourselves doing things that don't actually move us closer to those goals. We spend hours tweaking our website, writing LinkedIn posts, shipping new products, obsessing over analytics, jumping from tactic to tactic to tactic, creating more content, and polishing that Canva carousel. And somehow, despite being incredibly busy, we still feel stuck. Why does this happen? Because many of the things that we do in business aren't actually helping us move forward. They're moving us away from our goals. Now, this all clicked for me when I first heard about the ACT matrix. The ACT matrix comes from acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, a psychological approach used by therapists, coaches, leaders, and organizations to help people make better decisions and navigate difficult situations. I learned about this matrix in a completely different context outside of marketing and business. And what fascinated me was how relevant it is to business and marketing, because most businesses and most business problems aren't caused by a lack of tactics or ideas. Most of us already know what we should be doing. The challenge is that fear, uncertainty, pressure, perfectionism, and overwhelm often push us into behaviors that feel productive, but don't actually move us closer to what we want. So earlier this year, when I was preparing a talk for a conference in London, I realized that the ACT matrix was the perfect way to help people keep moving towards what actually matters, even when fear, doubt, stress, uncertainty, or discomfort show up. The easiest way to think about it is as a simple 4-quadrant matrix. At the bottom right is what's important to us, our goals, our values, what we're trying to build. At the bottom left is what's getting in the way. This isn't external obstacles, it's what's happening internally. It's our fears, our doubts, the pressure, the uncertainty, the stories that we tell ourselves. Then across the top of the matrix, we look at behavior. On the top left are the actions and behaviors that move us away from what matters, the things that we do when fear, uncertainty, and discomfort take over. And on the top right are the actions and behaviors that move us towards what matters, the decisions, the habits, the actions that help us make progress, even when those uncomfortable thoughts and feelings are still in there. What makes this matrix so powerful is that it helps us connect all 4 quadrants. We start with what's important. Then we identify what's getting in the way. Then we look honestly at how we're responding to those thoughts and those feelings. Finally, we ask ourselves, what would moving toward what matters actually look like? That's why it works so well for business decisions. In fact, I'd argue it's even more useful for founders and business owners. Here's a quick example. Let's say you're thinking about going solo or starting your own business. In the bottom right quadrant of the matrix is what's important to you. Maybe that's building a successful business, earning a good living, enjoying what you do, working with people that you like, creating more freedom and flexibility. Then we move to the bottom left quadrant. What's getting in the way? And 9 times out of 10, it's not lack of knowledge. If you're thinking about starting a business, chances are you already are very good at what you do. What's usually getting in the way is what's happening in our heads. What if nobody buys my product? What if this completely fails? What if people judge me? What if I make the wrong decision? Those fears and doubts, those lead us to the top left quadrant, the things that we do when those thoughts show up. We postpone starting the business. We spend another month planning. We apply for 3 other jobs. We spend months building a website. We buy another course. We keep preparing instead of starting. And finally, we get to the top right quadrant. the actions that move us towards what matters. Once we can see what's important to us, what's getting in the way, and how we're responding to it, we can choose a different path. When we can clearly see what's pushing us away from what matters, we can plan differently and choose actions that move us towards what we want, even when that discomfort is still there. For example, talking to potential customers, testing the idea, making an offer, getting feedback, launching before you're ready, taking action despite the uncertainty. That's the power of the matrix. It helps us see the connection between what we want, what's getting in the way, how we're responding to it, and what would actually move us forward. When I shared this framework during my conference talk, I asked the audience to think about a typical growth team. So let's start in the bottom right quadrant. What's important? For most growth teams, it's not just increasing conversions or hitting revenue goals, right? What's important is understanding customers, communicating the brand's value, connecting with the right audience, building trust, helping people make confident decisions, creating predictable growth, and ultimately driving sustainable revenue. That's what they're trying to move towards. Then we move to the bottom left quadrant. What's getting in the way? Again, it's usually not a lack of ideas. Most growth teams already know the tactics available to them. What's getting in the way is often what's happening internally. Fear of being wrong, fear of failure, pressure to deliver results quickly, anxiety about missing KPIs, confusion about priorities, perfectionism, imposter syndrome, internal politics, the overwhelm of trying to keep up with new tools, new channels, and AI, and those thoughts and feelings lead us to the top left quadrant, the behaviors that these create. Teams start collecting data for the sake of being data-driven. They jump from tactic to tactic. They copy competitors. They chase trends. They run endless button tests. They buy more tools. They produce more content without a clear strategy. They optimize for activity instead of insights. Now, none of these things are inherently bad. The problem is that they often become reactions to uncertainty rather than intentional decisions. They make us feel productive, but they don't necessarily move us closer to what actually matters and our goals, which brings us to the top right quadrant, the actions that move us towards what we actually want. This is where I showed how emotional targeting fits into the matrix. I explained that the 3 steps of emotional targeting framework directly support the goals we identified in the first quadrant. It's not just a framework for growth teams. You can use it for almost any business challenge. So let me show you what I mean. Let's take raising your prices. In the bottom right quadrant, we start with what's important. Maybe that's sustainable growth, better profitability, higher quality clients, more strategic work, less burnout, a stronger business, better positioning in the marketing. Then we move to the bottom left quadrant, what's getting in the way. As I said, not the pricing itself, right? You know how much you want to charge, but there's all sorts of things that are happening in our heads that are forcing us to not do that, like fear of losing clients. What if nobody will pay me? A scarcity mindset, the need for approval, the fear of hearing that's too expensive, or the fear of revenue declining, fear that competitors are going to charge less than you. And those fears lead us to the top left quadrant, the behaviors that these create. We keep prices low. We discount. We over-deliver. We take bad fit projects and clients. We justify our rates endlessly. We negotiate against ourselves. We customize every proposal. We say yes to clients who challenge our pricing. And finally, we get to the top right quadrant, the actions that move us towards what matters. Instead of keeping prices low, we charge rates that reflect our value. Instead of discounting, we hold firm on pricing. Instead of over-delivering, we deliver exactly what we sold. Instead of taking bad fit projects or clients, we decline misaligned opportunities. Instead of justifying our rates endlessly, we communicate value confidently and stop talking. What I love about this framework is how simple and powerful it becomes when you can see it laid out in front of you. You can clearly see what you're trying to achieve, what's getting in the way, and the behaviors that are pulling you in the wrong direction. And once you see that pattern, it's so much easier to identify the actions that would move you forward instead. In fact, it's almost the opposite. It also helps you be really honest with yourself. Here's one last example. Let's say you want to build authority and get on stage and start speaking. What's important? Building authority, growing your audience, speaking at conferences, sharing your expertise, creating opportunities for your business. Great. what's getting in the way. Fear of rejection, fear that you're not ready, fear that you're not an expert enough, fear of being judged, fear that nobody cares what you have to say. What do those fears create? You stay behind the scenes. You wait until you have a bigger audience. You tell yourself you'll apply next year. So what could move you towards what matters? Start small and pitch yourself to podcasts, doing an online webinar, gaining confidence by sharing more of your perspective on Substack or LinkedIn, building a deck, and maybe even speaking to other speakers to get their take on your talk, building relationships with event organizers, being visible before you feel ready. The ACT insight is that growth doesn't happen when fear disappears. Growth happens when you move towards what's important while fear is still present. That's what makes this framework so powerful for founders and marketers. If you'd like to try this yourself, here's a simple 3-step process. Step number 1, pick one challenge. Don't try to map your entire business. Pick one thing that's currently frustrating you or holding you back. Maybe it's raising prices, maybe it's hiring, maybe it's launching a new offer, building authority, getting on stage, whatever feels most relevant right now. Step number 2, fill out the 4 quadrants. Start with what's important. What are you trying to achieve? Then identify what's getting in the way. What's happening in your head? What fears, doubts, worries, or stories keep showing up? Next, list the behaviors those thoughts create. What are you doing when those fears show up? And finally, identify the actions that would move you towards what matters. If you weren't acting from fear, what would you do? Step number 3, choose one towards behavior, not 10, one action you can take this week that moves you closer to what's important. Because the goal isn't to completely transform your business overnight. The goal is simply to notice when you're moving away from what matters and choose to move towards instead. I'll see you next week on another Heart Before Cart episode.